discussion. Before the program begins, I'd like to extend appreciation to those who've helped organize our event. First, I'd like to thank the MECC Foundation staff and the MECC Foundation Cultural and Humanities Committee, chaired by Ms. Lena Grace, for planning today's program. Thank you all. Second, I'd like to thank the Lonesome Pine Regional Library System for their continued support and willingness to promote this event. Thank you to all of those who were involved. I'd like to thank the Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts Organization and its members for sponsoring our literary contest. Lonesome Pine Arts and Crafts has been an event sponsor since the inception of our festival, and we're grateful to this organization for their continued support of the prizes for our contest winners. I must also recognize the Origins Project, launched by Big Stone Gap native and author Adriana Trigiani, and the Origin Project Steering Committee, which have worked diligently to promote and preserve our region's rich history by encouraging our area youth to write the stories of their family's history. The Origins Project has been a wonderful partner in encouraging more creative writing in the region. If there are any Origins Project volunteers who may be with us today, I want to thank you for your work to strengthen the writing skills of our local students. Most of all, I'd like to thank and congratulate the individuals who submitted entries to our short story and poetry contests. All of them are winners, and we had some amazing entries this year. At the end of the program, we'll recognize short story and poetry contest winners. And while this is a time to celebrate the achievements of our area students, we should also celebrate the accomplishments of our local teachers who dedicate their lives to providing the instruction and encouragement, enabling our students to become proficient writers. Congratulations and thank you to our many teachers who have helped today's winners be successful. The MECC bookstore is offering the works of our authors today for sale online. You just need to go to our website at mecc.edu/bookstore. And at this time, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Amy Greer, MECC's Vice President for Institutional Advancement and Foundation Director, to introduce our first speaker.
Good morning, everyone. It is my honor to introduce Cassie Chambers. And hopefully I've got the screen working here. Hold on just a second. Let me switch over. Okay. Ms. Chambers' debut novel, Hill Women, has been described by one critic as a fascinating view of an often misunderstood population of America and an uplifting ode to the strong women at its core. Their unique stories and sacrifices inspire, a book to be celebrated. Cassie Chambers grew up in Eastern Kentucky. Her earliest memories are of playing on her grandparents' farm in Owsley, County, Kentucky. I hope I said that right, Cassie, and exploring the campus of Berea College with her mother and father. Cassie graduated from Yale College, the Yale School of Public Health, the London School of Economics, and Harvard Law School, where she was president of the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, a student-run law firm. Hold on, we've got an echo. Okay, I think I fixed that. I apologize. In 2018, she helped pass Jeanette's Law, which eliminated the requirement that domestic violence survivors pay an incarcerated spouse's legal fees in order to get a divorce. And I should have mentioned, Chambers received a Skadden Fellowship to return to Kentucky to do legal work with domestic violence survivors in rural communities. She is a lawyer and current vice chair of the Kentucky Democratic Party and lives in Louisville with her husband, Brian, and their dog. It is my honor to welcome Miss Cassie Chambers.
Well, thank you all so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And since I put together that biography, we've welcomed 2 little boys to our household too. So we now have quite the bustling household with me, my husband, a dog, a cat, and 2 boys under the age of 2 running around. But I'm really excited to be here and talk with you all about my book, Hill Women. Hill Women at its core is a book that is supposed to sort of honor the women in my life, the sort of strong Appalachian women that formed me, that shaped me, that gave me opportunities. And for the first time ever, I'm doing something new. I thought it would be important to sort of help set the scene and help sort of anchor these people and these places that are so important to this story. So I've put together some pictures, and let me see if I can get these up. Hopefully someone will give me a thumbs up once you can see them. Okay, everyone can see that? Great. So Hill Women takes place in Owsley County, Kentucky. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the background of Owsley County here in a minute. But it's sort of this small farm in Owsley County, Kentucky, where my family is from. And this is a picture of it. This is sort of what I think of as home and what I think of as the place that shaped me. It's in a holler surrounded by, the hills of Appalachia. The fields you see are where my family grew tobacco for much of my life. And this is sort of the place that Hill Women grows out of. My family sort of sharecropped this land. They didn't own it, but they rented it from someone. And instead of paying rent because they didn't really have the money to pay rent, they sort of gave the person who owned the land a percentage of the money they got from sort of selling tobacco each year. And this is another picture of sort of the house. And, I think of this house as almost a character in my life. I open up the book talking about how now it sort of looks like I describe it as an elderly woman. It's sort of folding in amongst itself. It has stories. It has sort of strength and power at its core, but outwardly it's certainly showing the wear and tear of age. But this is from several years ago when I was a very young child. And so this is kind of where Hill Women takes place. So Hill Women is really, it traces the story of 3 generations of women in my family. And I think it's important to talk about 3 generations of women because I think so often when we talk about one individual story, we sort of talk about it in this bootstraps type of narrative of one person, they're born, they go and they accomplish what they accomplish. And we sort of act like it's something that just comes from them and that they did all the work to make happen. And in my experience, everything I have and everything I've been able to do was because of these 3 generations of women, each of which was trying to work harder than the next, create more opportunities than the next, to be able to give their communities and their families opportunities. And I benefited from that hard work. And so instead of just talking about my life and the things I saw and experienced and the choices I made, I thought it was really important to weave in that idea of family and that idea of history, and that idea that for all of us, we're the products of our communities. And we're the products of our families, and it's not even just sort of our immediate families. It's we sort of come into the world on the backs of those that came before us. And so this is a picture of my granny. My granny, she had a hard life. She dropped out of school around the time that she was in 3rd grade, did not have the opportunity to finish her education. I think about her a lot and the fact that, she never really had a childhood. She never got to play. Now that I have children and I focus on, what fun activity am I going to do with them this weekend? It's very much in my mind that my granny never had the chance to do those things. She never got to go to the movies or go out to restaurants or sort of go shopping for new toys or any of that. She got married when she was 16 and started having babies when she was 17. That picture is of her and my papa. My papa was in his 30s when they got married. I think about that a lot too, about the fact that, my granny was really a child when she got married and started having children. And she would go on to have seven children. And although she hadn't had much of an opportunity to have an education herself, she somehow knew that education was an important thing. And it was something that she tried to promote to her children as they were growing up. And more than anything, my granny wanted to have a child that graduated high school as sort of a personal challenge to her, that she wanted one of her kids to be able to finish high school, even though they were living in a county where that wasn't common. That wasn't what the expectation necessarily was. And they were really struggling just to kind of make ends meet, and education was seen as a luxury back then. But I love this picture of my granny because despite the fact that she had a very hard life, I think this picture shows that she was someone who loved with a lot of intensity. You can see that intensity right there that she's kissing my papa with. And that's who she was. She was someone who loved life to the fullest extent. She used to put on her Ralph Stanley tapes and dance around her kitchen. And she was just this infectious, vibrant, loving human being. And you could just feel her love the second that you walked into her kitchen. Um, the next sort of woman that Hill Woman traces is my mom. And my mom was the sixth of Granny's kids, and she was the first one that had the opportunity to graduate high school. And I think in part, I've thought about it a lot. All of my mom's siblings that came before her, they dropped out sometime around elementary school because they were needed to help out on the farm, or, they just didn't sort of prioritize education. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about why it was my mom that was the one that was able to get an education and to graduate high school. And I think in a lot of ways it was because she was the one that spent the most time with Granny, sort of doing more housework while the other kids were out in the fields working on the tobacco farm. And I think that really rubbed off on her and influenced her and made her understand that she really, more than anything, she wanted to pursue education, and she kind of came to understand its value. My mom also grew up very poor. She used to talk about how when she was a kid, she thought Santa Claus hated her because she never got Christmas presents, whereas the other boys and girls at school did. And they sort of, didn't have indoor plumbing, didn't have a lot of things that other families in the area were starting to get around the time that my mom was growing up. And so she had a very, very hard life as well, and didn't have a lot of luxuries, and in some ways opportunities weren't given to her, but she valued education. She had Granny's support, and she was able to graduate high school and go on to get a scholarship to Berea College, which was something that really was unexpected and something that was just not what people from Owsley County were doing at that point in time. And then the other woman that is in Hill Women is my Aunt Ruth. And my Aunt Ruth is a force to be reckoned with. She was my mom's older sister. They were the two girls out of a family of boys, a whole herd of boys. And Aunt Ruth was a woman who, she still is a woman who gets things done. And she was a big support system for my mom. Ruth dropped out. Ruth had wanted to be able to graduate high school. She wasn't able to because of some health issues, because they needed her on the farm, a whole bunch of things. But she really pushed my mom to get an education. And Ruth herself, because she wasn't able to, she found her own way to succeed and her own way to be remarkable and be significant. And for her, that was becoming the best tobacco worker in all of Owsley County. So Ruth she could cut more tobacco stalks per hour than any man in town. She had everyone in Owsley County asking her to come and work on their tobacco farms. Just a real hard worker, and a real kind of get things done person. Not that many years ago, she started getting skin cancers on her hands, and she didn't have health insurance. And so she would take a pocket knife and cut them off herself, because she knew they had to be removed, and she didn't have access to healthcare to be able to get it done. And so I think that story says a lot about Ruth, the fact that when there's a problem, she's going to do what needs to be done to solve it. And then all of these women sort of come together to at the moment that sort of creates my opportunities in the world that I was born into. And so this is a picture of me on the farm in Owsley County. I was born to my parents when my mom was a student at Berea College. They were very poor. They struggled a lot. They brought me home to a rented trailer on Berea College's campus that they couldn't afford to run the air conditioning in because they couldn't afford the electric bill to be that high. But they valued education. They understood that education had been a tool that had allowed my mom to go from the hollers of Owsley County, where people didn't leave, to Berea, which was a small town. And in her mind, that had expanded her horizon so much that there was nothing that my mom believed was out of bounds for me to be able to do in my own life based on her experience. And Owsley County was a really important place for me growing up, in part because my mom was still finishing her degree. And so she relied on my Owsley County family to help out and to keep me for, a week or so, sometimes longer at a time, so that she could do this thing that was important to her of getting a degree, because she understood that that's what was important and would give opportunities to her family in the long run. And so a lot of my early childhood was spent here in this farm in Owsley County with my family, with Granny, with Papa, with Aunt Ruth, and this is a picture of that. And so those are all the pictures I got. I'm glad I didn't have any technical issues. That's the first time I've ever tried to do that. But I think it's important to kind of anchor the people that we're talking about and the place that we're talking about, so it's not just sort of this abstract thing. And I want to talk a little bit about Owsley County, about this place that was so formative in my childhood. Owsley County is one of the poorest counties in America by income. It's a place that has a lot of people with disabilities. It has a lot of people that aren't participating in the workforce. There's a high rate of unemployment. There's a high rate of child poverty. It's a place that has a lot of problems. When we think about what rural poverty looks like in America, Owsley County is sort of it. But it's also a place that, based on my experience and sort of growing up there, it's a place that has a lot of hope, and it has a lot of hardworking people, and it has a lot of possibility, and it has a lot of grit. And so one of the things that I wanted to do in Hill Women, and really one of the reasons I wrote this book, is because I think so often when we're talking about Appalachia, we focus on the problems, and the problems are real, and we need to address them, and we need to talk about them. But we also need to remind people that there are good, hardworking, creative, gritty folks that live in the mountains. And there are good, hardworking, creative, gritty women in particular. And a lot of times we don't hear their voices. We don't elevate those voices. And that's something that was really important to me to try to do. But I think one of the fundamental tensions when you're doing this kind of thing is how you balance talking about the problems with talking about the opportunities, and talking about the hope, and talking about the strength. And so I'm going to read just a little bit. I don't like sort of reading big, long excerpts of my book at these things, because then I'm just talking at y'all. But I want to read just a short passage from the introduction of Hill Women that sort of talks about this struggle between sort of showing the hope, showing the possibility, but also showing the problems. And so I'm on page 10 of the introduction here. It's hard for me to know which part of Owsley County I should show the rest of the world. Presenting the broken, falling in places helps people understand the extent of the poverty. And I do want them to know how deep it goes. Maybe if they understand it, they can help fix it. But I also don't want them to think that this poverty is all that exists in Appalachia. To see Eastern Kentucky as hopeless, broken, dirty. That's not what I see when I look at this place that I love. Some people look at these images of poverty with a sense of disgust. They see unkempt humans living in unkempt homes. Others view it with a sense of pity, those poor people trapped in such awful circumstances. I try to look at it with a sense of respect, to remember how hard they are working to survive in this overlooked corner of the world they call home. That last view of Owsley County feels the truest to me, even if the other views fit more easily into the categories outsiders want to create. For me, there is hope in the spirit of a people who find creative ways to exist in a community that has been systematically marginalized, in men and women who take care of each other, even when the outside world does not take care of them, in people who broke their bodies in tobacco fields and coal mines to make a living in the only community they have ever known. We don't take the time to see it, the hope in the poverty, the spark against the dreary backdrop, the the grit in the mountain women. And so throughout the book, that's sort of one of the themes, is how you sort of balance talking about problems with talking about the fact that the problems don't exist because there aren't hardworking people trying to fix them. It's not that there aren't leaders in Appalachia, a lot of women leaders, that have the ability to fix a lot of these problems if they just had the resources. And so I try to remind people to focus on systems and focus on finding ways to lift up and empower the people who are in these communities doing this work, because I think that that's how change happens. And I think when we talk about the problems, sometimes we create this sense of other. We talk about the problems that exist in Appalachia. It makes it seem like, for people who aren't from Appalachia, that it's this place that's really far away, that has a lot of problems, that needs someone to swoop in and save it. And I think it's important to remind folks that Appalachia doesn't need outsiders to come in and save it. It's perfectly capable of saving itself. What we need is for outside systems to help provide the resources and the tools and the ability for those communities to lift themselves up. And so that's one of the things that was really important to me to do in Hill Women. And I think one of the ways that we tell the outside world about the strength and the hope and the creativity that exists in Appalachia is to tell people stories. I'm a big believer that telling stories is how the world changes. That having that sort of personal connection and sort of seeing what leadership looks like, seeing what strength looks like, hearing someone talk about their experience and their truth is how problems come to matter and how solutions come into being. And that's based on my own experience. So in the book, I talk a lot about some of the women that I know and that I've worked with that have changed systems and changed their little corner of the world, and the ways that stories do that. And one of the examples that I want to spend a few minutes talking about here is with Jeanette's Law. And so after I was able to go and have all of these great opportunities because of the women in my life. I went to Yale and I went to the London School of Economics and I graduated Harvard Law School. And then I returned to Eastern Kentucky to work with low-income domestic violence survivors in rural Kentucky, because I believe that when your community gives you opportunities, it is morally imperative on you to pay those opportunities forward. I didn't have the opportunities I had, like I said, because of anything I did. It was because of these women, and it was because of my community, and it was because of others sacrificing. And so I thought it was really important to give back, because I had taken a lot from the mountains, both values and opportunities. And it was important to me to then sort of give back to this community and to this place that had given so much to me. And in that work, working with those low-income domestic violence survivors, one of my clients I met was a woman named Jeanette. And Jeanette had suffered extreme abuse at the hands of her husband for years, physical violence. And the night that she finally left him was a night where he came home drunk, got into an argument, physically assaulted her again. And the assault sort of ended with her in the bathtub and him raising a gun and saying, "I'm going to kill you," and firing the gun at her. And luckily the bullet missed, but it was so close that it actually ripped through her clothing. And to this day, her clothing with that bullet hole is still in police custody. And after that experience, she left him. She filed for divorce. He ended up incarcerated as a result of the assault. And before he was incarcerated, he had cleaned out their bank account. He had sort of went on the run from the law for several days. And so she was left, trying to divorce him, trying to start a new life for herself and her child, but without any money to do so. And that's where I came in. I represented her for free. That was my job at the time. I represented folks who couldn't afford attorneys for free. And so I came into the picture to help her figure out how she would start a new life. And we were able to get her a protective order. We were able to get her a divorce. But the real wrinkle in that situation came in whenever Jeanette was told that even though she couldn't afford an attorney, and she had, I think at one point, $16 in her bank account as she was trying to start this new life, The law in Kentucky said that because her husband was incarcerated, he had to have an attorney before she could divorce him. And I don't disagree that folks should be able to have attorneys, but the problem in this particular situation was who had to pay for the attorney. And Kentucky law at the time made it so that Jeanette had to pay for that attorney herself. And seeing the way that when I told her that, when I said, you know, they're going to appoint him an attorney and you're going to have to pay for it, it made her feel like our court system and like our system of justice was set up to work for the person that had assaulted and abused her and not for her. It made her feel like the court system that was supposed to sort of be a tool to help keep her safe and help her start this new life was actually weighted to working for the other side. And she didn't know how she was going to pay that bill. It wasn't even that it was that much money. It was just the fact that at that point, every dollar was a lot of money to her. And so Jeanette and I decided to change the law together. It was an unfair law. It was something that had made her feel like systems weren't working for her, and we decided, let's just get rid of it. It's time to change the system because it's really unjust. And what made the difference, it's hard to change laws. Now I'm a policymaker myself, and I will tell you that getting anything changed takes often years, even for the most common sense changes. Our government systems aren't set up to sort of move quickly and change course dramatically. But what made the difference here, because Jeanette was able to get that change in just a matter of a few months, and that's practically unheard of. But it was the fact that Jeanette told her story. And it was the fact that when it came time to testify before that state Senate committee and that state House committee, and time to start talking to the policymakers and the decision makers, she got up there and she told her story about what the worst night of her life was whenever she had experienced this horrific assault, and how her life had sort of fallen apart in the aftermath, and how this law had added to all of that chaos, and how it made her feel. And she showed pictures of her bruises. She let herself be vulnerable and cry in the media on television. And really, it was her strength in coming forward and talking about something that a lot of us, a lot of people still don't like to talk about, these sorts of, when they've experienced domestic violence, when they've survived domestic violence. And it was her stepping forward and stepping into her power that really created enough public pressure that the bill that carried her name, it was called Jeanette's Law, just sailed through the General Assembly with a speed that I've never seen any other bill sail through. I think it passed unanimously, and the governor signed it into law. And it was just this bipartisan thing that had support. And so I want to read just a short paragraph about Jeanette's Law and how that ties into this idea that storytelling is how the world changes. And so this sort of, I'm on page 239 if anyone has a copy of the book at home, and it's at the end of talking about Jeanette's Law and that process. And it's sort of talking about how there's still a lot more to do, but storytelling is the way the world changes. But each small win is just that, a win. And each win is a reminder that things can change. These wins are also a reminder that people who have been victimized, be it by a spouse or an unjust system, are nonetheless powerful. Some people portray survivors of domestic violence as weak. Some people portray the women in Appalachia the same way. I think Jeanette's story illustrates the opposite. When given the right tools, support, and environment, these women are capable of changing the world. And so that's why I love sort of talking to folks about storytelling, because in my mind, Hill Women is my attempt to tell my story and tell the story of other women I know to create change in the way that people think about Appalachia and in the way people think about women in Appalachia. And I think Jeanette's story is a very concrete example of how whenever you empower people to tell their story, you give them space and you give them opportunities, that the world changes as a result of that. And so the next thing I want to talk about in sort of my last few minutes before, I'm really excited and honored to be here with two amazing writers and talk a little bit about women in Appalachian writing. The last thing I want to talk about is, when you do tell your story, like I did, when you do talk about Appalachia, sort of what do you learn from the experience? What do you learn from the process? What's the goal of it all? Um, and for me, when I started writing Hill Women, I think I had this idea that I would tell stories, find clarity, and come out of it with a set of recommendations, almost like a policy proposal about how we're going to move Appalachia forward. That I would spend, the years that you spend writing a book and researching a book, and that somehow that would provide clarity on how we move forward. And in some ways it did. There are some things that I've really solidified my thinking about the problems facing Appalachia and the solutions to address those problems and move those problems forward. But in other ways, it's actually made everything more complicated. And I think that that's what happens a lot whenever you really dive into an issue. I don't believe that poverty still exists in Appalachia because there haven't been smart people working on the issue. There have been smart people trying to think about elevating and lifting up Appalachian communities for a long time. And the reason that these problems exist is because they're complicated and because the region is complicated and because finding solutions is hard. And so I think that that's something that's important to keep in mind too when we think about this is there are good people doing good work, and yet a lot of these issues and problems, they're entrenched. And I think the way that we begin to move forward is acknowledging the complexity and not running away from it and not trying to oversimplify it. And so the last passage that I want to read is from the ending chapter of the book that just sort of talks about this idea of of how I am thinking about the experience of writing Hill Women and a book about Appalachia and how it's shaped um, my thinking. This book is now complete, and I don't have all the answers I'd hoped to. I still struggle with how to balance the many delicate and competing concerns. Talking about the problems Appalachia faces while highlighting its strengths, recognizing the importance of tradition while still supporting innovative change, encouraging community-driven solutions, along with bringing outside resources to the region. I wish I had some more solid conclusions to share, but in the end, it's the complexities of Appalachia and the people who live here that need sharing the most. Today, more than ever, I'm glad I've told these stories. I hope they have shown people the surprising nuances of the region and its problems, so often reduced to a singular stereotype. I hope they have made voices from the mountains ring louder and helped people see the potential that exists here. I hope they bring attention to an area that we often allow ourselves to overlook. The people here deserve that. And so, with that, I'm going to stop yammering at you all. And right now, with my Zoom screen, it looks like I'm just kind of yammering at myself. And I'm really excited to have a conversation with these amazing other writers that we have joining us. So, Amy, I will hand it back to you to kind of transition us into our next phase.
Well, I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions to follow up before we get into our next part of the program. And this is just questions for me personally that I think would benefit our audience. I know as a college student, I took an Appalachian literature class at Clinch Valley College, which is now UVA Wise, and read my first piece of Appalachian literature. And it literally changed my life because it was the first time that I'd heard my own voice in writing. You know, in high school, really they don't teach you that genre in class, and so for me to hear and read and experience someone with my own voice was really important. So you mentioned um, something about encouraging individuals to elevate their voice. How would you encourage women or individuals from our region to elevate their voice when they really aren't sure that their voice is important? And I go back to my experience. I really wasn't sure that my voice was important until I heard someone else with that voice echoing back. So, how would you encourage individuals from our region to have the courage to have a voice?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I share that experience in some ways. I never thought I would write a book. I did not consider myself a writer. And I never thought that the narrative of my life, the sort of going from poverty to having these opportunities to be in the Ivy League, was something that people would be interested in reading about until around 2016. Y'all might remember there was a particular book that came out that in some ways sort of had a similar arc to my life and my story. And in other ways, we have very different understandings of that arc and what sort of created it. But sort of seeing it and seeing how people were interested in it, started reading, I was like, huh, that kind of looks like my life. That my story might be interesting to some people. They might want to read about it. But by the way, I totally disagree with like all of this other stuff in this story too. And that's what really sort of motivated me to start writing Hill Women, was this idea that someone's telling a story that's like mine that I disagree with. But it made me realize that my voice might be important in this conversation. And I wonder how often women particularly do that, sort of think that our stories and our voices don't deserve being elevated until someone kind of tells us, oh yes, your story has power and it has validity and whatnot. And so what I like to tell folks is I truly believe that stories are how the world changes. I really do. And I think it starts with when you see when you have a problem that has affected you, and there is something out there that's making your life harder, that you want to change, that you think the world would be a better place if it changed. You got to give voice to that problem. You got to make it personal, because when you talk about problems at this abstract level, people can tune them out. And there are so many people talking about so many problems in the world. People don't remember these statistics or these impersonal ideas. What they remember are the stories. And so I believe that if there's something in your world that you think you have the ability that you can make better by telling your story, put your voice out there, and you will find that you have more support than you could ever imagine. It's what happened when I wrote Hill Women. I'll tell you, this was my first book. And like I said, never thought I'd be a writer. So I didn't have a lot of writer friends or anything. And about a week before it came out, I started having this just panic. I was like, people might actually read this, people are actually going to read my thoughts and my feelings and know what I think about stuff and what keeps me up at night. And oh my goodness, this is so, you feel really vulnerable. But the ways that it's given me opportunities to advocate for issues I care about and connect with other people who are advocating for those has really changed my life and made me feel like I have a platform to impact the things I care about. So I would say it can definitely be scary, but it will also, you will find connection and you will find support, and you will make the world better. And at the end of the day, at the end of our lives, when we're all looking back, that's what I think really matters, is the way that you made the world better because you were here and the way you used your voice.
Well, that's a perfect lead into my second question for you. And just very quickly, you had mentioned before we came on that you also serve on a town council or city council. I believe that's right. Tell us why you think it's important for women to get involved in their community, because they really can make a difference.
They really can. And we still have women are underrepresented at all levels of government and all decision-making tables. And right now I'm a mom of 2 kids under 2 and thinking a lot about the role of women in government. I believe our government works best when it is representative at all levels of all the diversity in America. That's sort of when you have all the perspectives of all the people who are impacted by all the problems, that's what makes democracy its strongest. And I actually, my second book idea is focusing on this idea of public mothering and how you see this real drop off in participation amongst women of all other identities, sort of whatever group you're looking at. As women enter motherhood, they disappear from the public realm. You have women who will participate before they had children and once their children get to be teenagers. But we have more former prosecutors and people born outside of the United States serving in the United States Congress than we do women who have kids younger than teenage at home. And so there's this real idea that women still have to choose between sort of participating and being involved in their communities, and being decision makers or being moms. And I'm sort of living a life to show that you can balance them both. Now it means sometimes that I have my baby with me at a city council meeting, but I think it's good for decision makers to realize what working families are dealing with out there and to add that perspective. I am a working mom, and like everyone, I think daycare is too expensive and it's hard to find adequate childcare. And so I'm taking my lived experience, and in some ways it's just another version of telling my story. I'm showing up at city council with my kid and saying, sorry guys, couldn't find a babysitter tonight. And that's my way of talking about and telling the story of all of the other working moms out there who are sort of struggling to balance the same things. And so again, I think we need folks from all backgrounds to participate and step up. And women are a category that we still see being underrepresented, and particularly women with young kids.
Well, I personally thank you so much for your voice and your willingness to encourage others to be involved. It's so important that, like you said, that women be involved at all levels of government so that we are represented.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on to our second portion of the conversation. I'm so excited. I've got Lee Smith and Silas House with me. And let me first introduce Silas. And hopefully we'll see his real picture. There he is. All right. Silas House is the New York Times best-selling author of 6 novels, including his first, Clay's Quilt, in 2001, now considered a foundational text in Appalachian literature, and his most recent, Southernmost, in 2018, which was longlisted for the Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction. He's won awards including the Weatherford Prize for Fiction. House is a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers and a former commentator for NPR's All Things Considered. His writing appears frequently in the New York Times and Salon and has been published in Time, Ecotone, Garden and Gun, Oxford American, and many other places. House is a native of Eastern Kentucky and teaches at Berea College and in the Spalding School of Writing. Welcome, Silas. And next I will introduce Lee Smith. Born in a small coal mining town of Grundy, Virginia, and everyone from this area knows exactly where that is, Lee. Lee Smith began writing her stories at the age of 9 and selling them for a nickel apiece. Since then, she has written 17 works of fiction, including my favorite, Fair and Tender Ladies, Oral History, and most recently, Guest on Earth. She has received many awards, including the North Carolina Award for Literature and an Academy Award in Fiction from the American Academy of Arts and Letters. Her novel, The Last Girls, was a New York Times bestseller, as well as winner of the Southern Book Critics Circle Award. So anyone that knows me personally knows that Lee Smith is my Dolly Parton of Appalachian literature. She speaks my language, and I have been known to purchase copies of Fair and Tender Ladies and give them to folks, women especially, because of the profound impact that it's had on my life. It is the honor of my life to welcome Silas House and Lee Smith to Mountain Empire Community College's John Fox Jr. Festival. Thank you all.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a long introduction, but we'll start out just with a question about, and we can start with Silas if that's okay, and y'all feel free to chime in. Tell us about a strong female character in your writing. How did you develop that character? Is that character based on individuals you know? And what makes that character special?
Well, I guess the character that's most special to me in my writing is Anna Sizemore, and she's in my first novel, Clay's Quilt, and readers liked her so much, and I thought so much more about her that I wrote about her again in The Cold Tattoo, which is a prequel to Clay's Quilt. To me, Anna is sort of symbolic for Appalachia. She's this wild, free spirit. She's strong, tenacious, but there are all these obstacles that are put in her way, and it's like so much the world is against her. And I just, I feel like Appalachia is that way. It seems like we have such a hard time getting a break. Right, right now, for instance, Eastern Kentucky, a lot of Eastern Kentucky's underwater, and they just came out of having no electricity for a week. These massive ice storms. It's just one thing after another, and there are lots of reasons for this sort of devastation. I mean, some of it's political, some of it's environmental, some of it's historical. Um, but I think to go to stay on the theme of women, for me, I like writing about women because women have been the carriers of stories in my life. When I was growing up, the women in the family were who were telling the stories, and I was always at their feet. I was uh, up under a quilt rack while they were quilting. I was up under the porch eavesdropping. The women told the best stories, and their stories were gritty, but they were compassionate. It was like every layer was in their stories. There was so much complexity in the stories. And also, I just grew up around so many strong women. They were such forces, and they kept the family together. They kept the community together. Um, and so, the challenge in writing a, a female character for me is to not make her into too much of a saint. And so I always want to show women as fully rounded and really layered. And when I look at the women in my life, I think that's real easy to do because they're so three-dimensional, they're so complicated. And I think one thing that Appalachian women in media historically have been so stereotyped because, especially visual media like um, film in particular, likes to make Appalachian women into either um, they're either I don't know. I'm trying to think of a polite way to say this. They're either saints or sinners. You know, they're either like uh, the old sexless granny who only takes care of everybody, or they're Daisy Duke. Whose whole role is to be a sexual object. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there's not a whole lot of complexity in those portrayals. And I think historically literature has corrected that. Um, the literature has given that complexity that visual media has so often simplified. And so I appreciate that. Now, with that said, there is some literature that still simplifies. And there's one big book recently, I won't say the name of, that just had a big movie recently of it that I think does a really terrible job of that, of simplifying women, Appalachian women again. Um, and so I'm glad that books like Cassie's correct that notion. And of course, for me, and I'll hush after I say this, but I just have to say that, yeah, I've known Lee Smith for, I don't know, 25 years now.
At
And it is
least.
still, yeah, and it is still, it's still hard for me to talk about Lee publicly without getting choked up because she's just one of those strong women, who's been such a force in my life, such a symbol of Appalachia. I think what you said is just perfect. She's the Dolly Parton of literature in that she can do no wrong in my eyes and in the eyes of so many people I know. And so I wouldn't be a writer without her. And I know so many people that wouldn't be a writer without her. And she's one of the people that really modeled that for me, writing strong Appalachian women. There is no better character in Appalachian literature than Ivy Rowe in Fair and Tender Ladies. And she gives you the full spectrum of of being a woman over the course of the 20th century. So Fair and Tender Ladies is one of the essential books that everybody should read. So I just want to say that before I turn it over to somebody else.
Go for it, Lee.
Well, I can't say anything. Now I can't say a word because that is, I mean, that is praise I do not deserve. But I was thinking about where the stories come from, listening to Silas and you talking about, being up under the quilt rack and listening to these women talk and so on. I came actually from a family with big talkers on both sides. I mean, the women, yes, but also the men. And the men were all yellow dog Democrats running for Congress and carrying on and talking a whole lot. They had to. And it's including my daddy running the dime store, my granddaddy, he was the treasurer across the street, and taking me up every holler, politicking, where you hear all kinds of stories. And they were no slouches. I mean, when I think of the term story, I think of every Sunday being on my grandmother's porch until as it got dark, and the whole family would just show up over there, and they would all be telling stories. You couldn't drink. If you wanted a little drink, you had to go to the barn because my grandmother wouldn't let it be on the porch. But anyway, this was my childhood, and it was all stories. And I was born late in life to an older couple who had been told they could never have children. And so that meant I was always around the grown-ups. I was always there. I got to stay up. I never got put to bed and so on. And so I was always on that porch when the people, often the women, often the men, were telling these stories. And so my whole sense of the story is oral. I know some critic wrote one time and said, this is not a writerly writer. Well, it's not. I hear these voices, and that's where they come from. And they are so often the women's voices and stories about the women. It's just, it's both ways. But I think still my biggest sense of story is falling asleep on somebody's lap on the porch, and it's getting dark. It's gotten real dark. And so then we can look across Slate Creek and see the lights of the Morgan Theater, as we called it, shining up, these like fairy lights. And there's this voice, there's somebody telling a story, and I go to sleep. And that's my whole sense of story somehow. It comes from that. It's always somebody talking. And I think when I write today, it's still, I will do research and I will imagine the character and so on until I can hear her voice. And then I'll write down what she's saying. I mean, I'll write it down. So it's very much, it's very often the women, sometimes it's the men. And also, it's not only from my own family, but it's from people that I have been lucky enough to run into along the way. I know I was lucky enough to run into Silas, for instance, and I was lucky enough to run into a woman. Can I just read you one teeny thing? Because you're talking about Ivy Rowe, who is my character in Fairy Tender Ladies. Where did she come from? Well, she came from this moment in Abington, Virginia, when I had gone up there to teach one of these community workshop kind of things. And it was upstairs in a church, and it was hot. And it was the kind of thing that people who are trying to renew their certificates or something, teachers will show up for, and it was really hot. And I'm thinking, why am I doing this? And anyway, I had asked everybody, we're sitting around a round table, asked everybody to bring the first sentence of a story and read out loud to us, to be ready to do that. So we're all assembling, and all of a sudden there's this, we'd already gone around the table and introduced ourselves when here came this old woman in a man's hat and fuzzy bedroom shoes, gray head shaking a little with palsy, huffing and puffing up the stairs, dropping notebooks and pencils all over the place, greeting everybody with a smile and a joke. She was a real commotion all by herself. Hello there, young lady, she said to me. My name is Lou Crabtree, and I just love to write. My heart sank like a stone. Here was every creative writing teacher's nightmare. The nutty old lady who will invariably write sentimental drivel and monopolize the class as well. Pleased to meet you, I lied. And then I was saying, okay, we're going to go around. Now everybody's brought a story. We're going to go around the table, and I want everybody to read. And it was just hot. Everybody's sweating. Go around the table, and I want everybody to read the first, just the first sentence of your story, the first line of your story. So we began. Nice lines, nice people. A bee hummed at the open window. A golden square of sunlight fell on the old oak table. Somebody somewhere was mowing grass. We got to Lou, who cleared her throat and read this line. Old Reller had 13 miscarriages, and she named every one of them. I sat up. Would you read that line again? I said. Old Reller had 13 miscarriages, and she named every one of them. Lou read. I took a deep breath. Keep going, I said. And she said, only of late she got mixed up and missed some. This bothered her. She looked toward the iron bed. I mean, it just goes on, and then she read the whole thing. It ended with the lines, you live all your life and work things up to come to nothing. The bull calf ball somewhere. I had never heard anything like it. And I said, Lou, have you read anything else? I'd like to see it. Well, the next day she brought a suitcase. A battered suitcase, and the suitcase was completely full of stories and written on every kind of thing. I mean, from lined school paper to short backs and everything. And I just read it, and then she said, this ain't all either. And then she brought more. And I just immersed myself in this, and I began to understand Lou, who was that rarity, a writer of perfect pitch and singular knowledge, a real artist who'd written all this stuff with no thought of publication. It was just how she lived. It was what she lived by. And this and of course I worked with her a lot, and she ended up publishing several books and, getting a big award from the state of Virginia and lots of things. But this idea to me, I mean, I've thought about women and women's stories as much from the people I've worked with, I think. And that was where the idea for Ivy Rowe came from. Is she's writing letters to her, Ivy Rowe writes letters to her sister, but just writing to express yourself, writing, as a thing that you have to do, that is just coming, that is coming out of you like that. Writing not for publication, but as a way to live. And that's what Ivy did in those letters. And I think that's what so many women do with their own stories, and talking to each other and sharing and so on. And I agree so much with Cassie that an individual story is the way to make people understand other lives and the people's needs and so on. I mean, that's the only way to get right to the heart of it. I mean, I was writing, thought so much about all the women I knew growing up who had, way too many children, way too little education and so on. But if you write about a particular woman in that situation, then it becomes real to others. And so, Cassie, I just appreciate so much what you're doing, and the way I think as a lawyer too, to tell the stories, right, to not speak of the issues. I mean, I think this is so important, and I think this is one reason that fiction is so important, and that so many different works of fiction have meant so much to us, I think, as writers, as becoming writers, in addition to the people we ran into, the teachers that might have encouraged us, and so on. So anyway.
And Cassie, can you kind of talk about your character? I was particularly interested in your Aunt Ruth, who was not educated, but seemed to be the smartest person in the room, or at least she was portrayed as the elevated character, that she really understood life in a way that the rest of the family did not. And so I was particularly intrigued by her. Tell us about her character.
Yeah, well, it's interesting hearing Silas talk about, Appalachian women either being portrayed as sinners or saints. Took me back to right after I'd turned in the first draft of Hill Women. I had some friends read it, And they said, all of these women are too perfect to be real. Like, this is not interesting reading. And you've glossed over all of they don't seem like real people here. And that's because, particularly, I have so much admiration for my granny and my Aunt Ruth and my mom, and they're people that gave things to me. And for me, writing about real people with this idea in the back of my head that they might read it one day, I don't think that really became real until the moment that I had to drive and give Aunt Ruth a book about 3 weeks before it came out. And I was like, oh my goodness, what if I hurt my Aunt Ruth's feelings? What if she's disappointed? What if she's mad? What if, because it's not just her that's reading it, it's all the members of her community that are going to be reading it too. And so, Aunt Ruth, she is I could sing her praises all day. She is the smartest person in the room. She has that pragmatic sort of sense about her where she can kind of tell you what's what. And if you need to make an important life decision, you should go talk to Aunt Ruth, because you can mull it over and get stressed and anxious and be awake for several nights. And then you can go talk to Ruth and she'll give you one sentence that's going to make it crystal clear and tell you what you should do. But it's really hard, I think, when you're writing about real women that are going to read it, to allow yourself to really portray them as fully rounded people. And in my mind, I was trying to raise the voices of people that hadn't been written about very much. And so it was, and that I thought had been reduced to these stereotypes. And so it was really important to show, look how great and amazing and intelligent, and look at these wonderful stories. And at the same time, then sort of showing the times that there have been flaws, or none of us are perfect. And that's in some ways, our perfections and our imperfection. And so hearing Silas talk really brought me back to that moment when I realized, I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to say something kind of bad about Aunt Ruth. And it just gave me all kinds of worries for days. But I will say, Aunt Ruth has been really happy about the book and the way it's been received. And I think she's someone that has worked really, really hard for very little public recognition. And in some ways, she is like the many, many other women in Appalachia that have not expected to get praise, not sort of sought out praise. They have just done what they had to for their families. And nobody has given them awards or interviewed them on TV or written about them in the newspaper. And for her, people are reading it and ordering it in Owsley County, and she'll get a call from someone in Beattyville every so often. It's like, I read that book about you. And she got invited to go and do some local library events and talk about the book. And she's such a modest person. She would never she would think that having pride would be sort of sinful, and she doesn't want to boast or anything. But she called me the other day, and she was like, I got a call from, I forget who it was, Betty or something. And she read your book and she said, I'm the hero. And she just kind of left it at that. And for me, I think that's as close as I'm ever going to get out of Aunt Ruth, of saying sort of like, thank you, this means a lot to me. But it's been really nice to see her get recognition from her own community for all of the things she's done that otherwise I think would have gone sort of unnoticed. And in a lot of ways, it's easy to forget those small ways of making families and communities better that people engage in every single day. They're not sort of the things that get memorialized in history. So.
Well, Cassie, your writing also depicts several women, diverse female characters that face their own personal challenges or struggles throughout their journey. And that gives me to think about what do you think of, and this is a question for all of you, what do you think of as key traits of Appalachian women? Are there core traits that are shared among women from this region, or are women just as diverse as you encountered in Hill Women, that you have diverse women with different characteristics? Do they share a common bond, or are they extremely diverse? Maybe both.
Well, I think one thing is just that there is this enormous love and devotion to and care for their family. Everybody is really, really family oriented. And most people, and many people, certainly when I was growing up, everybody, you knew all the generations, they were still there. People hadn't really gone off anywhere much, and so people were there. And I think that is that's still true. And of course, that's a real good thing, but it can be a hard thing, I think, for the, for the child who needs to do something different and try something different. Well, will they be encouraged, toward that? But I do think this extreme family orientation and a lot of attachment to the place and to the land, and is real important. It is very hard to leave. I remember so many things about my childhood just so precisely, because I don't know. There's more. Somebody once said there's more there. And I think that's true. And I think it's affected women's lives, certainly. So there's that. There's has been often a lot of religion, a lot of that's been important. And I think, is that good or bad? I mean, a lot of it is good, but then when it leads to certain other, social issues such as birth control or not birth control or whatever it might be, it can, I think be damaging. And it's just, but there are a whole lot of things that are very, very important. And certainly the church and certainly the religion, and often multi-generational, with the same church. So there's that. What else? There's
Silas, how about for you? Are there key characteristics of Appalachian women that you can think of?
Well, I said the word strong a lot when I was talking earlier. So I guess that, to me, that's what the main thing I think about is that strength. And I think that a lot of that is just because Appalachia can be a really hard place to live. And I think it can be a harder place to live for women or for people who are the other in any way. And so, that adversity sort of weeds out the weak and the strong, right? And so those
Yes.
strong women are the ones that come to the forefront and tell and keep the stories and keep the community alive. I would also, in my own family, I think a lot about the way the women in my family defied sort of gender norms and social norms. I mean, if you go back to the early 1900s, women in my family were doing things that, like my great grandmother started this farm co-op in Leslie County, Kentucky, at a time when women, weren't known to be leading farmer collectives and stuff like that. That was thought of as a male thing to do, and if you think about, like, the most famous person from Leslie County, Kentucky is Mary Breckenridge, who she's not from Leslie County, but she lived there for years and she started the first midwifery school in the United States, and it's that midwifery school has had a tremendous impact on healthcare, and particularly birth issues that we still see today. So just that strength against adversity, and also not being defined by gender, refusing to let that shape the course of their lives, particularly in a time when, I mean, my great grandmother did that when she didn't have the right to vote. She didn't have the right to own land on her own, or whatever, things like that. She was still putting together this farmers collective that really saved these sort of people who had very little to begin with in deep eastern Kentucky.
I know we've talked a little bit about the struggles of women kind of in the past in Appalachia that have experienced, like the non-traditional gender roles and the religious implications and birth control and raising families, and farms, and you name it. But there are also struggles of women in Appalachian today. Can you all talk about what you think are some of the challenges that Appalachian women are facing in 2021 during a global pandemic? It's probably nothing to write about, but then again, we're in a unique time and a unique place, and I'm sure women are struggling now as well. I mean, Cassie, that might be a good one for you to take the lead on.
Yeah, I think in particular, what I've noticed is I think a lot of times the outside world isn't looking at the problems of Appalachia other than to do the fly-in journalism where they, show some people living in poverty and then go away. And I think this year there's been so much just struggle and hardship in all communities, but I do think it's meant that the particular issues facing Appalachia are not sort of getting lifted up in the same way. That there are in Kentucky, sort of rural Kentucky has had its own particular set of issues as it's faced around the pandemic, and I think it's hard to sort of elevate those amongst all the noise of all the legitimate other problems that communities are facing. But it's a place that, particularly when you look at the national media and sort of the stories that are really getting elevated throughout the country, it's a place that a lot of times gets overlooked in general, and then I think now in particular. I think a lot of the same systemic issues are still there. The idea of just we have to sort of figure out what, from an economic standpoint, can be a real model for Appalachia. It used to be coal and tobacco, at least in the areas that my family's from, and now both of those industries are sort of gone and not really the answers to be able to provide good paying jobs for folks. And kind of like Lee was saying about the sense of connection to the land, one thing that I've had the opportunity to live in New York and London, England, and all these big cities. And a lot of times people will ask me, well, if life's so hard there, and I agree with Silas, Appalachia can be a really hard place to live. Why don't people just leave is what they ask. They're like, why don't they just go somewhere else? And I think Lee's right, that idea of connection to the land is something that's really valuable and something that's really important. And I think people can and should be able to make legitimate choices to stay in their community. And it's not that sort of we should think of escaping rural Appalachia as the goal. The goal should be to let people sort of live in the communities they choose to live in a way where they can, grow, thrive, and have meaningful lives. And so maybe Lee and Silas are probably smarter than I am on this topic, because I've been thinking about a lot of sort of what we do to move Appalachia forward and what the answer is. And so I'll be interested to hear their thoughts, because I think it's a really important thing that we all talk about.
Well, I'll say one thing, because I'm really old, and it seems to me that the best thing that has happened is all the community colleges. And of course, we're talking, this is all being held by a community college, but that has changed. I know for me in the area where I grew up, to have, a college in Richlands, and now we have the Appalachian School of Law in Grundy, and we had to have this and to have that, those community colleges, so people could actually go to college without, an expenditure that is far beyond. And to have colleges like Berea and other colleges where you don't have to pay. I mean, this is, the educational, opportunities that have been brought in through that, to me, or dental school or whatever it is, there's a pharmacy school in Grundy, to have these things now available, which were not available, obviously, when I was a child, so that people can learn and can learn more toward making a living and being independent and so on. And, women too, that's been the biggest thing, I think, in my lifetime. And of course, there's a lot more that needs to happen, but that's good.
I think for me, there are two things and I totally agree with what Lee's saying and Cassie, but economic opportunity and gender roles. So first of all, I just think that there's still such a lack of economic opportunity, and that has a direct effect on women in the region, and that's the fault of our representatives who fail to get more economic opportunity into the region. Ultimately, it's our fault for voting in these sorry representatives, but that's a whole other topic. But the other thing, though, is I'm not sure, it's not really a Appalachian issue so much as a global issue, but I do think that it may still be worse in Appalachia, the way that we define these gender roles. And I'll give you an example of that. In my family, the women are always the ones who are expected to drop everything and take care of somebody who's sick or dying. You know, the men in my family are never called on to do that. It's always the women who it's expected they can just quit their jobs, or they can just, you know, put their lives aside and go take care of their mother who's dying or their father who's dying. The men aren't really called on for that. And I've seen that happen many times in my own family. And also in my family, you know, all I can really draw on is my own family, right? To know that that's the fact. But I sort of think of my family as really indicative of the Appalachian experience, and my place where I'm from. I do see it happening a lot. Um, I think that a lot of times that gender stuff has really happened where I've seen women in my own family be the ones who didn't go off to college, and the boys would go off to college. And I mean, this is 2021, and that sounds so antiquated, but it's still happening. I've seen it with my own eyes. I don't really know I don't know how to explain it, but I think it goes back to this idea that the women are meant to take care of the family, and they have to sacrifice themselves for the family in a way that that men are just not expected to. That's of course that's not everybody in the region, but I've seen it happen a lot in my family and my community. I don't know if y'all have seen that as well, but it's something I've noticed.
Well, Cassie mentioned bringing her child to town council meetings just so other folks understand the need for childcare, or, you know, her personal struggle with, I have a child to take care of too, and a job. And so if you aren't exposed to that as a man, maybe you don't realize that women are dropping everything to take care.
Yeah, I was on a panel one time, and it wasn't necessarily an Appalachian panel, but I was on a panel with two other women, and during the Q&A session, both of the women were asked about how they balanced motherhood and being a writer. I was not asked that, and I have two children, you know, so just things like
Uh-huh,
that.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
And
Well,
I
I
guess,
remember when my mother had died and Daddy was at home in Grundy, and he was still, not very well, but determined to run his dime store, which was not doing very good either. And I've got two telephone calls from people that were closest to him, that were in business with him and so on, uncles and cousins, and saying, well, now you're going, and said, well, you're going to come home now, aren't you? You know, and I'm teaching. I mean, was teaching at North Carolina State University, and I couldn't have come home, and he wouldn't have said that either, Daddy. But that's just, this was the older than, as old as Daddy. It was it was his first cousin, just saying, well, now you're going to come on home now, aren't you? You know,
I
because
know
he
it's
said,
a
because
struggle.
Daddy told him I didn't have a regular job because I only had to work 9 hours a week because there's something with the hours I was teaching. I can't remember what, but I felt like a dog. I mean, I just felt awful. Like I said, I can't, I can't come home.
I know it's still a struggle for many of our female students, and male too. I shouldn't just say female, but to have access to affordable childcare and be able to go to college and reach their educational and career goals.
Yes.
But
Yes.
it's so important too. Are there other things that we can do as a community to improve opportunities for women?
well, I just wanted to, and this is how I believe that we actually get to the policy change part. I've been talking a lot with a lot of my friends who also sort of serve in different public facing roles about this idea that we're calling public mothering, which is the idea that for a long time, motherhood, I think in Appalachia more so than other places, seen as very much in the private sphere. You raise your kids at home, you keep your kids at home, you sort of, as opposed to sort of going out into the public facing world. But when you're parenting, that's the home front, and the home front is private. And this idea of then sort of carrying parenting out into the world and making it more visible and sort of making it a more accepted thing, that it's not unprofessional if you have a community meeting in the evening that you take your kids, and your kids might, you know, act a fool and run around, but that's part of this. We say it takes a village to raise a child, and people might understand that, you know, your baby's going to squeal a little bit, but you're there and participating, and that's important. And I think that that's how you got to have the voices of the people who are affected by the problems in the room when you're talking about it. Be that, you know, going to your local town hall and sitting in and talking about what their plan is for the public park or the library or whatever, or sort of in elected office or in work environments. And I think the more that we sort of normalize that idea that people can be parents, and particularly women can be parents and still sort of do other things in the world, I think that that's how we get to this place of really understanding. You know, I think childcare will become affordable and high quality and prioritized when you have women who need it making decisions about it. And same thing when we're talking about, you know, schools and whatnot. We need people that are directly affected by this sort of being a part of the conversation, and too often they're not. Because again, I think in Appalachia more than some other places, even my Aunt Ruth, you know, I told her I was going to take my 6-week-old baby to my swearing in ceremony. She's like, don't you be getting that baby out in the cold. It is too cold. It'll catch its death of cold. And I was like, I don't have any childcare. You know, this is, I'm going to go get sworn in. I got to do it. It's how I get this job. And I got to take the kid because there's no other option. So, you know, for me, it's been really important to see other people doing that. And I think sort of following other people's example and having those visual cues in your mind of what it looks like to do that can be helpful and create this sense of community.
When you talk, when you're saying that, I have this image. One of the strongest images I retained from your book is when your mother graduated from Berea, and you as a child walked with her down there. This makes me cry. See, and now you're doing this, which is so important. And I think that's why, you know, because your mother did what she did and understood the importance of it. And so you certainly do. It's a chain, you know.
It is. And thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all are wonderful. I have one last question for everyone, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention this. I've got Cassie's book here with me. I've got Silas. I have looked for your books everywhere. We moved a year ago. I can't find them, but I have a stack of Lee Smith books here. But all of your novels, I shouldn't say all of them, but there is a selection of your works from Cassie, Silas, and Lee that are available at the MECC bookstore for purchase, and that can be done online, or I think you can go in person and visit the bookstore at the college campus. But look for those, and I will send. Last question here for everybody. Finally, would you encourage women in this region to be proud of their Heal Women status? I think I've grown into being proud of my Heal Woman status, but it took a while. You know, how do you encourage women to own that about themselves?
Well, I would encourage them to read Cassie's book, number one. And I think that's so important. It's important what you read and who you talk to, and to understand the importance of it. And, you know, I just remember reading something like The Doll Maker, Harriet Arno, you know, and things like that. This Wilma Dykeman's strong women that were Appalachian women. And I think the more that we read and the more that we know about these possibilities, I think is the most important.
Yeah, I can go next. I'll say for me, as you know, growing up without a lot of opportunities, coming from a background of poverty, finding myself in these sort of elite educational environments, I felt a lot of shame about the ways that I had struggled and the ways my family had struggled for a long time. And in some ways, that's what Hill Women is about, as well as sort of coming to see the value in other people coming from this background and recognizing their strength, and sort of then realizing that growing up poor was not something to be ashamed of. It was something to be proud of. And
yes.
And I think too often we sort of see struggles and challenges as things that we don't want to talk about and that we should hide, when really they're the things that have made us who we are, and the reason that we're strong and capable of doing all the incredible things that we can. And so I would say just try to shift the narrative, flip the script in your mind of any challenges you're encountering aren't something shameful. They're the source of strength and growth.
And I think, Silas, like you as a teacher, I know you have a lot of people that you've been, at Berea and where you're teaching and so on, that you run into, and it's just so important, for them to learn that their story is so important. They don't know that coming in, and I think for us as teachers, that's a very important thing to let them know, that. Cassie knows it.
Yeah, my favorite thing to teach is Appalachian literature because it gives me the opportunity. I have so many students who are from the region who come into the class. Their whole lives they've been told that there's nothing to be proud of in Appalachia, and they take my Appalachian lit class and they learn these masterpieces have been written in the region, but they also learn. I can't teach the literature without teaching the history of Appalachia, and so they learn that they have so much to be proud of, and so foundational to that is the role of women in Appalachian history and the way they have led the way. If you look at things like the Cold Wars and the environmental justice movement, civil rights movement, et cetera, women are at the forefront of all those stories. And Appalachian literature is really particular in that we have a lot more early women writers than if you just look at American literature. There's a lot more women writing in Appalachia and being published in a major way, which is really interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
But early on, like, in the 1950s, for instance, the leading Appalachian writers were women. Whereas in American literature, women were fighting for a space in American literature. But you had people like Harriet Arno, who wrote this big best-selling book, The Dollmaker, and other books, and whose talent was undeniable, and other writers as well. But anyway, I just think there's so much to be proud of, and I know that I have a 25-year-old daughter, and I know that the great source of strength for her are those mountain women in her past. She talks so much about how they have given her so much determination and drive and the ability to be herself and to really she talks a lot about how to be a woman in the contemporary world. She draws so much on the strength of her grandmothers and her aunts and et cetera, and so I have really, really tried hard for her to know that history and to understand their strength. And as a man, as a white cis man, et cetera, I think one of my roles is to always listen to other people's stories. And I think white men have had the power for so long that I am totally comfortable right now being somebody who wants to listen and to learn and to lift up other people's stories. So I just want to encourage other men out there to do that. I think that it makes the world such a better place if everybody has a voice and everybody has the ability to tell their story.
Well, you all have incredible stories to tell. And fortunately for us, they have resonated with an audience beyond Appalachia. I think people all over the world recognize us now and hear us because of your work. So thank you for being our voice. Even when we are scared to use it, you have represented us well. So thank you. And thank you again for participating today. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad if we got to do this. It makes me so happy. if you guys would hang out just a little bit longer, I'm going to invite folks that are watching on Facebook. If you want to ask a question in the comments section, go ahead and do that. And we'll get that to our authors, and maybe they can answer it online in real time, and we'll wait for that. But in the meantime, we're going to go ahead and announce the winners of our John Fox Jr. literary contest that we hold each year. We have done this for many years, and we have short story and poetry entries in middle school, high school, and adult categories. So I'm going to start with the winners of our 34th annual Lonesome Pine short story contest. In the middle school category, our third place winner for 2021 is Anderson Robinson of Ridgeview Middle School. Anderson is recognized for his short story titled The Spy Who Never Died. Our second place winner is Kiera Hamilton, a homeschool student, for her piece titled The Art of Winning. That sounds like, who wrote that book called The Art of Winning? What's that? I don't, never mind. Our first place winner is Presley Strouth, a student at Ridgeview Middle School, for her story titled Souls in the Sky. Congratulations, Presley, for your first place win, and congratulations to all our middle school short story contest winners and everyone that entered the contest. Unfortunately, we did not have any entries in the high school category of the short story contest, but we did in adults. Our third place winner in the adult category is Matthew Stanley of Norton for his work titled Where the Tree Falleth. Our second place winner in the adult category is Willie Dalton of Pound, Virginia, for his piece titled Red and Milky White. Our first place winner in the adult category is Faith Mabe of Abingdon for her work titled Max and the Moon Pie Deal. So congratulations to all of our short story contest winners. I'll mention again, these short stories will be available in a PDF format later on today. Hopefully, will be posted to our website for all of our viewers to read. And congratulations to those folks. Also, our winners of the contest will receive a cash prize, as well as get to participate in a workshop with Lee Smith later today, which I'm sure everyone is excited about. I would be. I'm going to announce the winners of our 17th annual Lonesome Pine Poetry Contest. In the middle school category, our third place winner is Emma Gibson of Ridgeview Middle School. They certainly submitted a lot of entries. For her entry, Stress, this was a tie in the third place, and Kiera Hamilton, a homeschool student, for her work, Loving Now. Our second place winner in the middle school category is Brody Vanover of Ridgeview Middle School. Brody is being recognized for his poem, The Peaceful Pond. Our first place winner in the middle school category is Kaylee Calhoun of Ridgeview Middle School. Kaylee is being recognized for her work titled Anxiety. Congratulations to our middle school poetry winners. In the high school category of the poetry contest, our third place winner is Leah Teasley of John I. Burton High School. Leah is being recognized for her work, I Am From Black Culture. Our second place winner in the high school category is Alora Hutchinson. Alora is recognized for her work titled Where I Am From. And our first place winner in the high school category is Sheelin, I hope I said that right, Pruitt at John I. Burton High School for her work, My Mother, My Own. Congratulations to our high school poetry winners. Yay. And in the adult category of the poetry contest, our third place winner in the adult category is David Winship of Abingdon, Virginia, for his work, Must Be Present to Win. Our second place winner in the adult category is Dominique Locke of Castlewood for his work, Interlopers. And our first place winner in the adult category is by Edison Jennings of Abingdon, Virginia, for the work Country Song. So congratulations, round of applause for all our, yay, yay. And we may have a question come in. Hold on just a second. Let's see. We do have a question. Congratulations to the young authors. This comes from Penny Jeffrey. Penny says, will the middle school entries that didn't place be able to get feedback from the authors so that they can work on their writing? And normally we don't do that, Penny. I'm sorry. But maybe their teacher would be so kind to share their work. And any encouragement from you guys now about writing and encouraging young writers. I know I started writing stories, and I'm sure Lee did too when she was a young girl. What would you say to encourage our middle and high school students to be creative? Those are things that usually are hard to do nowadays with all the scheduled activities that kids have. And how do you find time and encourage children to explore writing?
Well, I would say we're just gonna have a little club on the side. It's gonna be a lot of fun. And pick 2 words and say, everybody write a poem about, or pick 2 ideas, write a poem about this or write a poem about this, and we're gonna meet and we're gonna share them. And and we might just, we might do it. How are we gonna do it now with the pandemic? We'll have to see, but we're gonna, we'll figure out a way to do it. And I just think, because it really is fun. I mean, right, we forget, I think, writing is a means of communication. It's not just something we do ourselves and just put under the mattress. And if you can get them sharing with each other and make fun things and maybe make answer poems and there's a million things you can do. It's almost like playing games to get them going. I think I used to teach 7th grade. I loved it so much. So.
Or I'm sorry, Silas and Cassie, did you write when you were younger? And do you encourage your kids or your students to also write?
I've always been writing, and I was really lucky to have a 7th grade English teacher who really took me under her wing and encouraged me. To see somebody like her who really cared about literature in such a deep way and was passionate about it sort of released me to be able to do that too. For the young writers out there, I would encourage you. Well, first of all, I want to say that I work with a lot of young people, and I see so much anxiety and depression among young people. And I think one thing that really saved me time and time again was writing. I think to be a young artist is so centering, and it's such an outlet. And so I want to encourage people to turn to that in times of anxiety and depression. And of course, that's all been amped up by the pandemic. I mean, I can't imagine being a teenager during this. No. And, your social life is so important as a young person, especially. So I have worried so much about them and all the developmental things that they're missing out on during this time, as high school students and college students. So I think turning to art, consuming it, but also creating it is so important. And so I would just, tell them to write about what you care about, write about what you know. I think I wasted a lot of time writing about stuff I didn't know about. I would set stuff in Hawaii because I thought that would sell, or something like that. I know Lee has talked about that too. But finally having somebody to say to me, write about where you're from, write about the things people do where you're from, that released me in such a big way. And to write about what I cared about. I mean, I tell students sometimes, if you love motorcycles, then write about motorcycles, or whatever. You don't have to write about just because War and Peace is a masterpiece doesn't mean you have to write Russian literature. You write about what you know and what you care about. So I think things like that released me as a writer.
Yeah, and I would say I always kept journals growing up and would, write little poems or little stories in them or whatnot. And eventually sort of gave it up in part because I had this idea that what Silas and Lee do is really hard. And I didn't think that I'd ever be able to write a book. And so I sort of let people tell me that being a writer is a hard thing to do. And then here I am writing a book. And so I think it's important, what Silas said, write what you know. I think everyone has a story that's worth telling, and figuring out what your story that's worth telling is and what the platform is that you're going to tell it on. And I think that for me, writing, at least sort of journaling, has always been a way to, you get out what you need to say. And I think don't be afraid of what I call the word vomit sometimes, which is just I'm a perfectionist and I'll get in my own head when I'm writing stuff and sort of be like, oh no, it's hard to get going because you feel like it's not perfect. And for me, I think there's a lot of catharsis in just the word vomit of just start saying what's on your mind and how you're feeling and get it out. And maybe it'll turn into the story you tell that, changes the world, that makes a difference, that makes things better. Maybe it'll just make you feel better for the evening, but don't be afraid of the word vomit and just recognizing that you're leaning into it and the words are coming out and you don't know what they're going to sound like or when it's going to stop, but just getting it out can certainly make you feel better.
I think it can be really helpful to think in terms of write every day and get your own book. And I like ones, I like kids keeping things that also have stuff that they find that's stuck in there, and leaves and pictures and just anything, and that you have to and think to yourself, okay, I'm gonna write something every day. And so then that makes your life so much more interesting too, because you're thinking what, and you're noticing things, and you're a little bit less depressed because you're noticing other things. And what are you going to, and you can write about something you overheard, or write about something you saw, write about blah, 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 and just have, these, you can have funny little assignments but have them writing every day, and have them put pictures and just any kind of thing in with it. And I think it can be, it can be very cathartic, to use your word from earlier, and it can be lots of fun. I mean, you don't know what you know till you start writing something, and then you say, oh, and it can be it can be fun. It can just to give them the kinds of topics that are fun, and they don't think of that. They think of it as some holy event, but it's not.
I've got one question that's come in, and I need to make one quick correction. Our second place winner in the adult category for short story is Willie Dalton, which I mentioned. Willie's piece is actually titled The Agreement, so I apologize for that. Sorry about that, Willie. And then we have a question, Silas, for you. This comes from Jenny Simpson Page, and she says, Silas, your novel, A Parchment of Leaves, resonated so deeply with me that its characters haunt me to this day. Redbud trees have always been my favorite trees in my home of Southwest Virginia. Touching the leaves and breathing in the energy of such a solid presence on this earth. Wow. I just can't express in one comment how much I love this book. Thank you for the gift of it. So it's really not a question. It was just a nice comment for you, but
Thank you so much for reading it. I appreciate that. I can't tell you how much that makes my day and week and month and year. But the redbud trees are almost back. Just not much longer, right? About a month, I guess, and we'll start to see them. And it is always, to me, the redbud tree is one of the symbols of home for me. It's one of the things that it's just a foundational thing for me, and it's to me, the redbud tree is so epitomizing of Appalachia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Dr. Westover, would you like to add anything as we close out today? And again, I just want to express my appreciation to Silas, Lee, and Cassie.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, likewise, I'd just like to express my appreciation. Thank you so much for sharing, not just today, but for your willingness to put your stories out there and to be vulnerable and to share those stories. I'm so pleased to hear, the idea that stories can change the world, because I agree. and your stories definitely have impacted us in ways that we probably can't even describe, and so appreciative for you taking the time today to share with us, and really taking the time and making the effort to share your stories with the world. We're it's been a wonderful morning. I can't believe it's already noon. Like, where did the time go?
How did that happen?
But,
I'm going to encourage all our folks to go out and look for the redbud trees when they start coming out,
absolutely.
and appreciate and love where you are, and read more Appalachian literature. Read Silas, read Lee, read Cassie's Hill Women. Pick up those books at our bookstore, and support these wonderful artists that are the voice of our generation in this area. So thank y'all so much, and
Thank
you
you
have
all.
a great afternoon. Lee, I'll see you later. And
Yes, you will. Yes.
take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.